guys, if you missed any of the first hour of the show, you can go back on the podcast. Conversations about LeBron's game at Madison Square Garden last night. We're not even acknowledging that it could be his final game at Madison Square Garden because we all think he's coming back next year. The Knicks beat the Lakers last night. All of the latest around Giannis, as Shams Charania has reported, our ESPN NBA senior insider, that the Bucks have given counteroffers to those teams that have made offers, which we all deem to be a story of significance because that at least means you're entertaining, even if it's the Timberwolves calling and you saying, I want Ant. It's still a counteroffer. There's still a counteroffer that has been made by the Milwaukee Bucks. And then the two hires that we saw in the NFL over the weekend with the Raiders soon to be hiring Clint Kubiak, offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, and the Arizona Cardinals hiring Mike LaFleur, brother of your coach, Matt LaFleur, in Green Bay. We also saw a pretty stunning move over the weekend in terms of a firing at the GM position. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Vikings general manager, was let go over the weekend. Now, the day before he was fired, he met with the media and was asked about the decision to move on from their former quarterback, now Seahawks quarterback, Sam Darnold.
You spend a lot of those nights, obviously, you're up in these decisions and they're uncertain, and you're trying to make sure that you don't lock yourselves into what you did and thinking that it's always right. And so there's those nights that you wake up and stare at the ceiling and ask yourself. But I always go back to the process and what we thought at the time. It's easier to kind of go and be revisionist and results-based, but going to really think through what we had at the time. I still understand why we did what we did. The results maybe didn't play out the way we wanted them to, but ultimately, I think that at the end of the day that we could have executed better in certain places. And I don't want to say individually in terms of a particular player, but just executing better, knowing what the room was, play style wise, experience wise, and just kind of really put together a better combination of people, collective in that group. That's kind of the thing I've probably focused on the most. That was really just a great learning experience that tied into the quarterback discussion, and those are things we'll carry with us going forward.
Okay, so before we get to the comments of Mark Wilf, the owner/president of the Vikings, he makes those statements. He's fired the next day. It's not like they realized that Sam Darnold was in the Super Bowl because he made those statements, Smalls. Do you think in any way, shape, or form, anything he said contributed to the expedited process here?
No, based on everything that I have read and what I understand about the situation, is that this had been percolating for some time, and the Vikings had just yet to make the decision. I don't think that his commentary pushed it over the edge. I think it's more likely that there was obviously some fracture between the front office and the coaching staff. Maybe they weren't aligned as far as their vision of moving forward. I also think the fact that only 4 of his 28 draft picks are going to be starters for the Vikings, that played into this. And then if you're reading anything coming out of Minnesota, clearly the way that he went about things caused some sort of discontent within the building. He has an untraditional background. He came from Wall Street before he came into the NFL. And I think that outsider coming in never really sat well with a lot of other people. And it just seems like this is something that had been brewing for a while. The timing of it is a little peculiar to me, because why would you not do this right after the season? If this is the route you were going to go, or you had an inkling that you wanted to fire him, you should have done it after the season to position your organization to be in the best position to get the best candidates out there. So I was a little surprised that he would be at the Senior Bowl, he would be doing these interviews, and that then they would elect to make this move. But clearly they talked to enough people and heard enough about how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was operating behind the scenes that they said, we can't have this moving forward.
Courtney, let me just ask you a question as somebody that covers the NFL on a daily basis. Everything Smalls just brought up, wouldn't the Vikings have known that before Friday? They knew he came from Wall Street. They knew what his 4 drafts looked like. They knew Darnold walked, or they didn't up the ante. They knew that he drafted J.J. McCarthy and that he wanted him to be his guy. They knew that Darnold led the Seahawks to the Super Bowl. So everything Smalls just said, factually, combining to maybe lead to this, they knew before Friday.
They knew the moment that they were eliminated from the playoffs, which I believe was like week 14. So they could have made this decision. They had the information to make this decision months ago. That was December. So had agreed to terms to sign that contract. The parties of power inside the organization know that he wasn't exactly seeing eye to eye with how the general manager was going about his business and about building this roster. And there was a time when Flores was talking at the end of the season about, like, I am happy here in Minnesota. My family's happy here. I love working for the Wilfs. I love working for Kevin O'Connell. He never mentions the general manager there. And that now feels like it was calculated that way. And I don't think there's any, like, this shouldn't come as a surprise, and I know in a lot of respects. I know a lot of people, I was surprised at the timing of it, because the timing just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, everybody else has hired their general managers. The Wilfs have said they're not hiring a general manager until after the draft. That's months from now. But you have to understand the culture of why this team did it this way. Rick Spielman was their former general manager, and for 15 years, because he didn't have that title the entire time, they had a different structure in the mid-2000s. But the Wilfs did business one type of way for 15 years. When they fired him, when they fired Mike Zimmer and decided to go with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell, offensive-minded head coach, non-traditional background in football, no scouting background, came from the analytics side of things with the San Francisco 49ers, then to the Cleveland Browns. That's Kwesi. They did a complete course correct because they thought we grew stagnant doing things the way we had done it for so long here, and it netted us one NFC championship appearance, and we haven't been able to get back there since 2017. So that's why this situation they find themselves in played out the way that it did, because they did things a complete 180 from the way that they had done it for so many years. And it was this forward-thinking, cart before the horse mentality that got Minnesota in this situation by going a completely different route that they thought, okay, well, maybe since we've tried it this way all these years and it hasn't gotten us to a Super Bowl, maybe we have to try it so in a way that's so different and so abnormal from how we would think we have to get there. And you can't fault them for trying, but there were warning signs the entire way that this thing was not going to work.
Mark Wilf is the owner and team president of the Minnesota Vikings, and he had this to say on the decision to move on from their general manager, Adofo-Mensah, this weekend.
We held our end of the season organizational meetings over a couple of weeks, and then spent this past week as an ownership group reviewing, discussing, and how best to move forward. This is a critical offseason. Ultimately, we felt a change was necessary in football operations and did not feel comfortable going forward into this offseason with the current leadership. It's not about any one decision or move. We looked at the situation cumulatively. We just didn't feel confident going through the entirety of the offseason, an additional draft, and free agency with this structure.
Yeah, I think the Sam Darnold part of this is insanely overrated.
Why?
I don't think this is about Sam Darnold getting to the Super Bowl with the Seahawks at all, or them letting him walk. This is just about J.J. McCarthy, that they don't think he's good. Mm-hmm. If J.J. McCarthy...
They're inextricably linked, because you chose J.J. McCarthy over Sam Darnold.
I don't believe so. I'll tell you why. If Kirk Cousins next year goes to a different team outside of Atlanta and they go to the Super Bowl, whatever team that is, and Michael Penix Jr. looks like a legit quarterback, like his peers in this draft, Drake May, Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, if he looks close to them, it doesn't matter that Kirk Cousins got to the Super Bowl. It matters that Penix is developing. This is, to me, not about... This guy did not get fired because he let Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones walk. He got fired because he chose J.J. McCarthy, and J.J. McCarthy is showing no signs of life in Minnesota.
But you had a guy in Sam Darnold who won 14 games for you last year, who loved Minnesota, who, according to reports, was willing to perhaps take a team-friendly deal to stay there because he found a place and a head coach where he finally was able to flourish, and they hedged their bets and went with the young guy in J.J. McCarthy. And that Sam Darnold decision also not only affected, as you mentioned, Daniel Jones, who goes to Indy, and before he gets hurt, looks pretty good. It also impacted them not going out and getting Aaron Rodgers. And not only with J.J. McCarthy did you decide to bet on him, it impacted what you did from a backup quarterback perspective as well. So I think it's all cumulative. I think the quarterback situation cumulatively is no longer the GM of the Vikings.
I disagree. I think it's just because of J.J.
He got fired because he's in over his head. Like, ultimately, that is what it is. And yes, the quarterback situations, like Michelle pointed out, it's not just the letting of Sam Darnold go, so he's now on a Super Bowl team. Of course, the optics of that look terrible, but there were multiple quarterback misses along the way, from Aaron Rodgers, who wanted to be in Minnesota this last offseason, you don't go out and sign him, to signing the wrong backup, then having to trade for Carson Wentz because Kevin O'Connell's like, I can't coach this guy. Sam Howell is not a fit here. Carson Wentz is. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did not have the capability of doing this the way it needed to be done for a team that is always going to try to make big swings. They spent more money than anybody else last year in free agency, and they're a team that found its way out of the playoff race by week 14 last season. His inexperience ended up being his downfall. It was almost, he was naive to a fault, honest to a fault. And there were times where you hear him speak, which he didn't do publicly all that often, but when he did, you're just kind of sitting there like, do you really have the chops to do this, to be a football decision maker in a division that's getting more competitive by the year, in a landscape that requires you to make big swings, but also land on those big swings? He has 28 draft picks to his name. 4 of those guys are surefire starters in the NFL. His 2022 draft class was such a disaster that it like spins forward all these years later and looks even worse now. Some of the picks that they had with their first 2 rounds that aren't even in the league. Like, it's a culmination of those things on top of just frankly, like the workability and the ability to mesh with others inside of your own building, inside of your own department, that just ran its course. And when somebody wins a power struggle in the NFL, ultimately here it looks like it's a Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, the coaching staff won out because their vision did not align with the front offices, and you cannot have that level of disconnect. Otherwise, you're going to have bad drafts and bad free agency signings. Like, you have to stop the bleeding where you can. I just am surprised it took this long for them to arrive at that conclusion when they had this information months ago.
I'm glad you brought that up, Courtney, because in reading so much about this over the weekend, it sounds like from the beginning he kind of didn't really fit in. Like, he came from Wall Street. He had this analytics background. There's been a lot reported about him taking paternity leave, which is very frowned upon. You know, these unwritten rules, the mores of the NFL.
The what?
The mores.
Word of the day?
Yes, word of the day.
Yes!
Unwritten rules.
You have to know
customs.
my alarm is going to go off anytime I hear more because I want to destroy it. As in Daryl. But a good season so far.
I'm pretty good at the winning thing.
No, me today, Daryl, with Smalls.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Way to start the week off with the win. But seriously, though, these unwritten rules of the NFL that you have to be 1,000% in your personal life always